Alrighty, it is time for Chapter 11 of Gutters. Hey, it's a Saturday. That's nice. And I'm uploading. Alright. Let's get started. Peter isn't quite sure what to do with himself when it dawns on him that Denmark is crying. A large, obvious part of him knows that he should be offering some kind of comfort, any at all. But he's still stone-shocked from before, with bits of skin and streaks of red all over his neck and face, and Denmark is still coughing up more and more blood into his palm between sobs, and Peter just doesn't know how to handle it. He's scared, terrified, scared that the people might still be looking for them, scared that Belgium and Netherlands are dead, scared that he has the brains of a complete stranger all over his coat, scared that Denmark keeps repeating Netherlands' name over and over again like it's the only thing keeping him in one piece. He's scared by the steadily increasing pool of blood between the roots of the tree and the fact that they only have one bullet left and barely enough food to last a week if they're lucky. Everything has crashed into him at once. Every fear and morbid thought that he has had over the last several years, slowly but surely becoming a reality. And he is suddenly very, very aware of just how small he actually is. He brings his trembling hands up to his face and tries to wipe his cheek clean. His skin is sticky and hot from running, and when both palms come away with thick red, he spends a long moment just staring, wide-eyed and hyperventilating, before he lurches forward and grabs Denmark around the waist, burying his face between his shaking shoulders and screaming into his back. It's selfish. He knows it's selfish. Selfish. That's a weird word. Denmark is torn between mourning and sickness, and all Peter can do is cry for his own fear. He wants to be mature, and he wants to comfort him, and he wants to be as brave as Denmark has been for him, but he has someone else's blood all over him, and he doesn't know what to do. Denmark loses his balance when Peter crashes into him and falls sideways onto his stomach in front of the tree. He tries to brace himself, tries to push back up, but his arms buckle, and all he can manage to do is lie still with his forehead pressed into the crook of his elbow, eyes pinched shut as he struggles to get his breath back. "Peter," he wheezes. "It's okay." Peter shakes his head and pulls off of him, his fists clenched into the front of his coat while he watches Denmark turn slowly onto his back. His lips and nose are stained red and wet and still running slowly in little diagonal lines down his cheeks into his ears. His chest is heaving and his pale face is streaked with tears, eyes barely open, and he makes absolutely not a single move to sit up. "Denmark, get up. I need your help." He grabs the sleeve of Denmark's coat and tries to haul him upright. "Please, I need to get it off." Denmark's hand comes up to rest on top of his own, but he says nothing. He's too winded still. He has an arm wrapped around his chest where Netherlands' boots came down, empty, wet breaths pulled in and out, and his eyes are too unfocused to possibly be able to see properly. He's blinking, so irregular and sluggish, and he's too shaken and too thin and weak, and leaking too much into the ash. He's dying, Peter realizes suddenly. He's been dying the whole time. Peter grips his coat and tries again to tug him. "Get up!" he cries. Please get up. Please, I need your help." He manages to shake Denmark several times, but he's far too weak himself to pull him upright again. He pitches forward and presses himself to Denmark's hitching chest. Please, get up." He can feel Denmark swallow and bring up a hand to the back of his head. "I will," he murmurs. "Just give me a minute, okay?" Peter just curls his fingers into Denmark's lapels and cries into his neck. He isn't sure how much time passes before Denmark finally plants both hands on the ground and pushes himself into a stiff sitting position. He sits still for a moment, just pulling in slow breaths before he carefully seats Peter against the trunk of the tree, and keeping a hand on his shoulder, picks up their bag and rummages around until he finds an open bottle of water. He uncaps it with his teeth and tips it into his bandana, turning Peter's head slow to the side and gently pressing the wet cloth to his blood-stained cheek. He doesn't say a word while he works, just silently clears his skin, pausing every now and then to rinse the bandana, and picks pieces of bone and flesh from his hair until he is clean once again and only sniffling. "Are you all right?" he asks him softly and runs his fingers across his head. "You're not hurt?" Peter shakes his head. "No, I'm okay." Denmark's hand falls back into his lap and he looks down again blinking in a way that makes Peter think he might be falling asleep. "I'm sorry," he says after a moment. "I promised you that I wouldn't let anyone touch you, but..." He presses the heel of his palm against his forehead and releases a stuttering breath. "I'm sorry, I won't let something like that happen again. It's just you and me until we find the others, and if we run into anyone else, I'm not letting you out of my sight, even if it's someone we know. I won't trust them with you." A pause. "Wish Berwald was here." Peter sniffs when Denmark moves to take his hands into his own, cleaning each finger free of red. He can feel the way his fingers clench around the cloth, and immediately feels bad when he looks up and finds Denmark's eyes swimming again. "I know," he says. "I know. I'm sorry." He sits back and scrubs a hand down his face. "I'm sorry." Wait, I didn't mean..." "It's okay, Peter." He looks up and manages a bleary smile. "He always was better at this kind of thing than I was." Peter bites his lip and reaches out to tentatively take the bloody bandana into his own hands, wringing it out into the dirt and wetting it again. Without a word, he shifts forward into Denmark's lap and begins to clean his face as well. The blood around his nose still warm when he dabs the cloth against it and begins the slow task of lifting it all away, as gentle and calm as he can manage, with his heart racing as fast as it is. He's careful. Denmark feels like paper to him, and he's terrified that if he rubs too hard, he might burn up beneath his fingers and drift away with the rest of the world, like the trees and the cars and the homes, like Netherlands and Belgium. Denmark closes his eyes while Peter works in silence, and when he quietly announces that he's done, he falls forward, hands in his lap, and rests his face in the crook of Peter's neck. He doesn't say anything, or move to touch him. He doesn't move at all. He only sits there. He scarcely feels like he's breathing at all, but Peter can feel his 2 fast breaths against his cheek, and he brings his arms up to hug Denmark's head. "It's okay," he whispers. He can feel Denmark's spine pushing out through his coat, and he buries his face in his shoulders to hold onto him a little tighter. "It's okay." Nightfall doesn't see them much further than the tree. They begin walking again after Denmark composes himself and consults their map, proclaiming that they need to find the road again before they continue their journey, because he has no idea where they've wound up. After finding north, they start out, and he carries the pack on one arm, while Peter attaches himself to the other, heading up the ravine and back to the thick of the forest, cautious and hyper-alert as they move through the trees and rotten leaves in search of the highway. Peter is optimistic at first. The road wasn't far from Netherlands bunker, so they can't be too far off. He supposes that they'll find another car to sleep in, and in the morning, retrace their steps back to a point on the map they can follow, and set out for the next town. But the going is too slow. Denmark's strides are unsteady, and he has to keep stopping to rest. Even with the mask, his breath is thin, and he keeps a hand pressed to his side as they walk, eyes pained with every step, and Peter can practically hear his ribs creak from beneath his clothes. He never complains, though, and he apologizes each time they pause so that he can sit down and mop the sweat from his forehead, a rueful smile making the corners of his eyes crinkle when Peter grips his coat in worry and helps him take a sip of water. He tries to wave it off. Just a little worn out, he tells him when they stop for the second time in an hour. It's been a hard day. Peter doesn't believe him, but when he tells him that he does, not wanting to make things any more stressful than they already are. By the time the sun starts setting, they're still in the middle of the woods, without a clue where the road might be. Denmark has the flashlight from Netherland's bunker, and he instructs Peter to hold it, while he constructs them a lean-to of branches and debris against the side of a huge fallen tree, laying out their blankets and opening a can of tomato soup once he's sure the slanted little structure is secure enough to get them through the night. It's dangerous, Peter knows, to be sleeping out in the open like this, but they have few options at this point, and he eats his soup in silence across from Denmark while the last of the daylight disappears in the distance. When Denmark passes him what's left of their dinner, his shoulders look heavy with an invisible weight. It was better when it was hot, huh? He asks softly. Peter doesn't know what to say. He falls asleep earlier than Denmark does, his exhaustion somehow overcoming his fear of being found, and manages to disappear into his own head for several hours, tucked away against the tree and wrapped up in blankets that still smell like Jan's shelter. When he falls asleep, Denmark is still outside, and when he wakes up again a few hours later, he is surprised to find himself alone still, and again worry begins to gnaw at his insides. He pulls the flashlight to his chest and crawls out of the lean-to, a blanket tied around his neck against the cool night air. Once he's outside, he flicks the switch on, and the clearing just barely lights up under the dull yellow lamp. He doesn't have to look far to find Denmark. He's sitting on the other side of the log, leaning against it with a distant expression held on his bruised face. He's looking up into the sky with his coat draped over his legs and his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows, casual almost, and has the respirator pulled down around his neck. He has the cigarette held loosely between his lips. He turns off the flashlight. Denmark? He turns his head just enough to acknowledge him. There's enough smoldering, red illumination from the cigarette tip for Peter to see the silent tracks on Denmark's face. Can't sleep? His voice is just barely above a whisper. Peter nods and goes to sit down next to him. He smells like sweat and burnt tobacco. You weren't there when I woke up. I got worried. He pulls his knees up to his chest. Are you okay? Fine. An awkward silence drifts for a moment before Peter nervously looks over at him again. Are you sure you should be smoking that? He asks. I mean, I know why you want to, but... Denmark shakes his head. I'm not really smoking it. Tried to, but it hurt too much. He pulls 2 fingers up to pull the small stub away from his lips, holding it like some kind of fragile treasure. I'm just waiting for it to disappear, as taut as... I don't know what that means, but okay. He brings it back up. All that bullshit. Peter looks down at his feet. That doesn't sound like Danish. It's not. He swallows. Dutch? What does it mean? Ashes to ashes. Oh. Another long stretch of silence where they just listen to each other breathe. I'm really sorry, Peter whispers. Denmark doesn't move. Yeah. He was just trying to help his sister. He was an idiot. He panicked. We could have helped him. Peter flinches at how hard Denmark's voice is. I know, but... He trails off. He's too exhausted to try and even make sense of the mess of his thoughts in his head, and settles for just shifting closer to Denmark and spreading the blanket out around them both, leaning and resting his head against his shoulder, waiting for him to finish. I still consider him my best friend, Denmark says after a moment. Does that make me a shitty person? Peter shakes his head. No. He hugs Denmark's arm. I don't think he was a bad person either. No. Denmark crushes the last of the cigarette between his fingers. He wasn't. He rubs his fingertips together and flicks the black residue off into the dirt, leaving them completely in the dark when he sighs and finally moves to sling his arm around Peter's shoulders, pulling him in and stroking his hair. Thanks, kiddo. I'm sorry, my voice sounds so scratchy today. Well, not really, but I don't know. I don't know what to describe it as, but it's icky. Alright, I think I'm gonna end this here because this is gonna take too much space up on my phone because I record on my phone. So I'll end this here and then hopefully get out the second part in a few minutes, depending on when this uploads, of course, because sometimes it takes a few hours and that sucks. Alright, have a good day or night, and I will see you guys later. Bye-bye.